These are the formulas for the expected value and for the variance that you get on the AP formula sheet. So something that I want you to see is variance is just the square of the standard deviation. So if you wanted to turn this into the formula for the standard deviation of a random variable, you would just take the square root. But that's not something you're really going to have to do by hand in practice. So we're going to let the calculator do that work for us here in just a second. So in parts A and B, here we have a probability distribution, and it's discrete because I can list all of the outcomes and I can list all of the corresponding likelihoods or probabilities. This is the distribution, the probability distribution for scores on the 2016 AP Statistics exam. So if you wanted to find the mean score, it would be important in this case to actually show your work. So it is every outcome multiplied by its probability, and we take the sum of those. That's what this formula says. The sum of every outcome times its probability. So it would be important to show your work in a case like this. It's not hard to show. So there's the 3s, here are the 2s, and here are the 1s. Now, rather than taking the time to put all of that into the calculator, I'm going to use the calculator in one shot to both calculate the mean and to calculate the standard deviation. That's something you can do using one variable statistics. So on your calculator, you're going to want to enter the probability distribution into list 1 and list 2. I've already done that, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 for the outcomes on the AP exam, and then here are the corresponding frequencies. So under calculate, if you use one variable statistics, one of the options that you can use is to tell it you want to use the outcomes in list 1, but we want to use the frequencies or the probabilities in list 2. And then this will calculate for us the expected value or the mean. We're going to round that to 2.9. And then here's the standard deviation of about 1.4. For those of you that have a TI-83, your calculator command will look like this. You'll enter the one variable stats command, but then on the home screen, you'll have to type list 1, comma, list 2. The calculator will assume that list 1 is where the outcomes are and list 2 are where the frequencies or where the probabilities are. So again, if I run that command, we have a mean of about 2.9 and a standard deviation of about 1.4. So for the sake of this, there's our mean AP score. The standard deviation is about 1.4. But it's important that you can interpret a standard deviation. So we need both the mean and the standard deviation to work those together. So the most important word to use when you're interpreting the standard deviation is the word typical. So this tells us the typical variability above and below the mean. So a typical AP stat score is between, we could be 1.4 below the mean, so 2.9 minus 1.4, that would be 1.5. So we would be between 1.5 and, if you take the 2.9 and add a standard deviation, that gives you 4.3. So typical AP Stats exam scores in 2016 are between 1.5 and 4.3. So you should leave these as decimals. Don't round these because notice 2 is typical, 3 is typical, and 4 are the typical outcomes. 2, 3, and 4 are the typical outcomes that are between these two boundaries. These are boundaries that we can use to compare the actual outcomes. Don't round these. You can round them to a single decimal place, but don't round them to the nearest whole number. So what this tells us also is that outcomes such as 1 is not typical. It's not within these boundaries. 5 is not typical. It's not within those boundaries either. So if you watch the next video then, we will do parts C, D, and E of this example where we look at combining random variables together using this mean and this standard deviation.